Okay, thank you everyone for joining me. Beginning the journey of the portion of SHELACH. Very interesting portion that talks about the spies, the agents who went out to explore the land and see whether it was, in fact, how it would be taken over, what were the fortifications and the challenges in taking the land. This was an episode that began with us wanting to know more about the land that we were going to be taken into. And unfortunately, as a result of all that transpired, we knew less, because this entire generation, save for two people, did not make it into the promised land. It was only the next generation that would. So let's go through the summary of the events that take place in this Shabbat's reading. In the portion of SHELACH, Hashem allows Moshe to send spies to scout the land of Canaan, and this was in preparation for the anticipated invasion of the land. Now, Hashem did not come to Moshe and say, I want to send spies. It came from the Jewish people. They were the ones who said to Moshe, we want to send out agents who would be able to assess whether what the land is like. And Hashem said that Shlach lecha anashim, yes, I'm going to send. They're going to send the spies by your own choice rather than by what I would want to do. Anyone getting feedback? I'm not sure why there seems to be a bit of feedback. Just unmute somebody. Are you able to hear me properly? Okay, good. Okay, so one representative was chosen from every tribe. So Nasiach, one prince of each tribe was chosen, except for the tribe of Levi. They represented their tribe on this mission. She instructs the scouts to report on the strengths, the weaknesses of the land, and they returned after 40 days with specimens of Canaan's fruits, produce, which were exceptionally large. It's described how many people were required to carry even a bunch of grapes. It was huge, beautiful produce, but they also returned with an ominous report. They reported that the land, in fact, taka, flowed with milk and honey. Yeah, good. That was the good part. But that it practically was impossible to conquer this whole venture, this whole idea of taking on the promised land could never really happen. That was the report of 10 of the 12 spies. And then you have Caleb and Yehoshua, the remaining two. Remember, Caleb was a brother-in-law of Moshe, of Moses. He was married to Miriam, Moses' sister. Joshua was destined to be the future leader. They were the only two of the 12 representatives of the tribes that went to spy out the land. They represented the tribe of Yehuda and Ephraim, and they argued that Hashem would enable them to conquer this magnificent land. And what are you talking about? Of course we can take the land. But the Jewish people cried, and they said, we now prefer to go back to Egypt. We don't want to be defeated by the people of Canaan. So the report was ominous. It described the impossibility of the task at hand and disheartened the entire people of Israel. So Yehoshua and Caleb try their hardest to present the alternate view. They reject Yehoshua and Caleb and even attempt to stone them. Hashem informs Moshe Rabbeinu that he is going to destroy the Jewish people due to their lack of faith. He's trying to give them the promised land, and they don't believe. They don't believe in the promised land. They don't believe it's possible. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu successfully invokes Hashem's mercy. We have the verse of Hashem, kerachom v'chanun erech hapayim v'rav chesed, which we say on Yom Kippur, and we ask for Hashem's mercy. We also sing it as we take out the Torah on other Yomim Tovim. It's the words that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to formulate, and it invoked Hashem's mercy. Explained, and he said to Hashem that if you execute this entire people, it would be a desecration of your name, Hashem, because the people of the world would assume that Hashem destroyed the people because he just couldn't take them into the land of Canaan. In fact, the land of Canaan was too difficult to take, and therefore those people that he took out of Egypt had to die because God wasn't able to do it. That's what they're going to think, says Moses to Hashem. You owe it to yourself, for your own name, not to abort this mission. Hashem agrees to Moshe's request that he would not destroy the entire Jewish people, but that generation would not enter the land. The entire generation. Every single person who was born in the desert, who was between the age of 20 and 60, would die out over the next 40 years. They would now wander in the desert for 40 years, and everyone would die out, including Moses, and except the two spies who came back with a positive report, Caleb and Joshua. Bnei Israel would wander in the desert for 40 years. All males over the age of 20, with the exception of Joshua, would perish. The 10 scouts who brought back this frightful report died immediately. So they did not last the 40 years. They died immediately. When the Jews were informed of Hashem's decision, they lamented and they grieved. Too late, she cried. So now everyone said, oh, now we really feel bad. Hashem, we didn't mean to upset you. Please don't decree on us to die out in the desert and not take us to the promised land. And in fact, a group decides that they're going to take the land now. They don't want to wait 40 years. They're going to fix the problem. Sometimes you want to fix the problem and you create a bigger one. This is what happens. So a group who entered Israel against Moshe's warning, they said, we're taking off. We're not going to take over the land, and we're not going to wait the 40 years. Moshe Rabbeinu warns them and says, don't do it. You're on your own, and in fact, you won't succeed. And all of them were massacred by the two peoples of Amalek.
No, man, close the door. I can't hear, man.
Waiting for them and destroyed all of this ambitious group that wanted to do it faster than they were allowed to. Full stop. That's the end of the episode of the spies. And now we have a whole lot of disparate laws, and we're going to string them together and try and see their connection to this week's portion. What are they? That sacrifices have to be accompanied by a wine libation and a flour offering mixed with olive oil. A seemingly absolutely not disjointed piece of information that in the future years when they would bring a sacrifice, it would have to be brought onto the altar, and that would be accompanied by a libation of wine. Furthermore, there was a mitzvah of challah. When we knead dough, a portion must be taken and given to the kohen. Today, we don't actually give it to the kohen, but we symbolically separate a part of challah, and everyone today is familiar with the chief rabbi's Shabbos project, and then we had this challah baking with thousands of ladies. And lately, whenever any time we're saying Tehillim, women get together and they have a challah bake, and they then create the mitzvah of separating a bit of the dough, which symbolically is separated today. In times of old, was actually given to the kohen, and we taught that law now. Also seems to have totally no connection to the episode of the spies. Then we taught the laws that a Sanhedrin that erroneously brings a community to idolatry. That could happen. The Sanhedrin was the high court. And if for whatever reason they made a mistake and they ruled a ruling that caused the Jewish people to make a mistake and to serve idolatry, so they had to bring a special sin offering. They didn't intend to do it. It was done by mistake. That is how they would fix their problem. Then it speaks about laws regarding an individual. That's the Sanhedrin, an individual who is guilty of idolatry, inadvertently or intentionally. And then it speaks about a brief interlude about a person who was found desecrating the Shabbat intentionally, demonstratively, and was executed. And finally, the last section of this Shabbat talks about the mitzvah of Tzitzit, and it is in fact the third paragraph of the Shema, which we recite every single day. And they'll make tzitzit for themselves. We have the responsibility to make 4 cornered garments have tassels called tzitzit, which would remind us, that we will remember all the mitzvot, the commandments of Hashem, and we will not follow the temptations of the heart. So it's a uniform that a Jewish man must wear so that he's reminded not to follow the dictates of his heart and not to sin. So we know that you'll look at the tzitzit and you'll remember. For that reason, when we say the Shema, we hold the tzitzit in our hands and we look at them and we actually kiss them. So we demonstrate how we will look at our tzitzit and be reminded of all the commandments. Some people wear their tzitzit underneath their shirt, not the talis that we wear for davening, but a small talit katan that we wear under our shirts, over our vests every single day. And you'll see that some people have the tzitzit hanging out of their pants. Some people have them hidden. Those that wear them out, it's because of this mitzvah that you will see them and be reminded, so we want to see them. So that is the final mitzvah of tzitzit, and we're trying to see the connection between that and the episode of the spies, because it seems to have no correlation, seems to have no connection whatsoever. So let's go into this journey of the spies and what was happening. So the Talmud, and quoted in Rashi, says that the wording and the name of this week's portion is SHELACH, which means send. That's the first verse. Send out for yourself men. Send out for yourself, as the Talmud tells us, as your mind dictates. I didn't suggest this, says God. You want it, I'm letting you do it. I'm not instructing you. If you sow the zai, send. For the people of Israel had come to Moshe saying, let us send men before us. It's written, you all approached me and you asked, and Moshe consulted with Hashem. And Hashem said, I've said that it is in good land. By your life, I will now give you the option to err. So sometimes when Hashem answers our prayers, it's not necessarily going to be a good thing, because we're asking for the wrong thing. Hashem was saying it was actually inappropriate to ask to send spies to see the land. God said, I'm going to give you the land. It's a beautiful land. That should have been enough. We didn't need to send our own piece of information to be able to find out whether it was a good land or not, or how we would, or if we would be able to conquer it. Hashem promised we should have had the faith to follow without asking. Once we asked, Hashem said, I'll give you your request, but it might come at a price. You might suffer the consequences of this whole episode, which ultimately they do. So now Moshe gives a name to Hoshea. That was his name prior to this episode. Vayikra Moshe leHoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. So Yehoshua, Joshua, was a rename of Hoshea. In fact, Hashem just added a yud to his name. Hoshea became Yehoshea or Yehoshua, which means God will save. So the Talmud in Sota tells us that he prayed, Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for his student Joshua, who was ultimately going to take over the reign and succeed Moshe Rabbeinu as leader of the Jewish people. He said, may Hashem save you. That's what the name means, save you. Hashem will save you. May Hashem save you from the counsel of the spies. I don't want you to get caught up in this mistake. And in actual fact, that was one of the two spies that came back with a positive report. That was Yehoshua. So we now know why he had the strength to withstand the temptation of following the other 10 spies and being caught up in the negativity. Because he had the letter of Hashem, the Yud of Hashem's name added to his name, which gave him the strength not to succumb to the pressures. We actually know that he took this Yud from Sarah. Because remember, prior to Sarah being named Sarah, she was called Sarai. She was called Sarai with a Yud. The Yud was taken away from Sarah's name and given to Joshua. But at any rate, Joshua had some kind of inner strength as a result of Moses giving him this new name, which included the letter of Yud, which represents Hashem's name, to be included in his name, so that his name now meant Yud, Hashem will save. Now, how did Kalev, the other spy that came back with a positive report, who came together with Joshua, how did he have the strength to withstand? So the Rashi tells us, the Midrash tells us, that Kalev went and traveled to Hebron alone. What is in Hebron? In Hebron we have Marat HaMachpelah, the cave of the forefathers and mothers that are buried in Marat HaMachpelah. And this is the first instance where we have somebody going to pray at the grave of the righteous, of the tzaddikim, to find the strength to be able to succeed in the mission. So it is common now that people in Israel go to the graves of the great righteous people in Tzfat, in Safed. There's an ancient cemetery there. They go to the graves in Yerushalayim on Har HaZeitim, on Mount of Olives. Many people go to the graves of the soldiers that gave their lives for Kiddush Hashem and Mount Herzl, because one goes to the graves of righteous people to be able to ask that God intercede and help. So Joshua had the strength of the letter Yud, which Moses gave him. Kalev had the strength of a mission that he took on himself, where he separates himself from the group as they got into Israel, and he went off to Hebron. And there are verses that allude to the fact that Kalev was subsequently, his tribe was subsequently given the region that he had walked, and they in fact got the region of Hebron. So we know that Kalev had gone to Hebron. Now, the instruction to go up said, Aluz Heba Negev. Remember, they were somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula, and they would therefore go up to Israel by crossing through the Negev. The Negev, as we know, is a semi-desert. In fact, it might even be considered a proper desert. It is only the great inventiveness and creativeness of Israel that has turned the Negev into wine-producing soil. They actually have boutique wineries that take the grapes from the Negev. They've transformed much of the Negev into very fertile land and turned it around. But nevertheless, it's the worst part in terms of region. You know, when the partition plan happened long ago, when Israel accepted the partition plan of the British and the Arabs did not, the partition plan gave Israel very little, and the worst of Israel, the land. The Negev, which was arid and very few cities established, Israel accepted it nonetheless, but the Arabs did not. So that was the dross of the land. So Rashi explains that this is the manner of the merchants. What do merchants do? When they come and they have beautiful cloth or beautiful suits or flowers, whatever they're wanting to sell, they don't bring out the finest diamonds first. They will bring out the lesser merchandise first. And then as you work your way through their merchandise, eventually out comes the prize gem that comes right at the end. So Hashem said, you want to know how to see the land? Start with the worst, go through the Negev, the lesser quality merchandise, and then ultimately you'll see the prime merchandise, and you get to the north, you'll see the land for what it is really. So start with the bad and end with the good. That's a relevant point because we're going to see how the spies failed with this process. Generally, what you end off with is what you're really thinking, what you end off with. People start and then they end. So we generally start off with the negative and then we end off with the positive. But when we want to make a negative point, we start off with the positive and end with the negative. But that's so that the good is overwhelmed by the bad. And that's a tendency of human beings when they want to be negative, as we'll soon see. So let's go through the technical failures of the spies. These are classic commentaries that give different reasons why the spies failed and why they were considered to be so sinful. Because it could be argued, of course, if you send spies out on a mission, and the mission is to go and check out the land, and then they come back with a negative report, maybe they're just being honest. Maybe that's what they felt the land was. So they would report what they saw. You can't now hold them accountable and say, no, that's not what we wanted you to say. We wanted you to say the good stuff. If they were sent to come back and to report, why would it be a sin for them to report how they viewed things? That would be the honest response. But the commentaries explain that, and we take a closer look, and it is so relevant to this particular time that Israel's going through, how negative reporting can cause such destruction and can influence so badly. So the first comment, one of the commentaries says, the first mistake of the spies is who they reported to. See, who actually dispatched the spies was Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses was the one who sent the spies. He was the commander-in-chief of the army, and they were sent to go and find out and report back. So to whom should they report back? They have to report back to the commander-in-chief. That is what would happen. If a Mossad agent is sent into the field and he comes back, he must report back to his handler, to the person who sent him on the mission. What happens if instead the Mossad agent comes back from the surveillance and he calls a press conference with CNN and he says, these are my findings and this is what I... So now he is not true to his mission. His mission was to report to Moses. The first failure of the spies, says one of the classic commentaries, is to whom did they report? And that will show what was going on in their mind. If they came with honesty and they needed to communicate, they would go back to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, Moses, you sent us, and these are the weaknesses and the problems and the difficulties. These are the challenges, and we worried. And then the commander-in-chief can draw up a plan. But they didn't do that. They returned, and instead of going to Moses, the verse says that they came El Ha'am, they came back to the people. So this was an information war. They came and they started talking in the broadest possible way to the greatest amount. They got it onto Twitter, and they got it into the Instagram accounts, and onto all the Facebook pages. They held a press conference. And when a person holds a press conference with valuable information, it now becomes suspect what their motive is, what is your intention, and what are you trying to accomplish. When people call to arms against Israel, and they claim that they're speaking truthfully and they have an opinion and they want to voice their opinion, so how is that opinion voiced? And if it's voiced in parades and in marches and in car caravans with people screaming out of their windows as they were in London that we will kill the Jews and rape their daughters, which is what happened in London, so then one is not convinced that this is a group of people wanting to communicate the essence of truth. Because there's an agenda here. And the agenda is first identified by whom they are speaking to. Where are you taking the message? And if the message is to try and rabble-rouse, then your message is unfortunately diluted and doesn't have the integrity that you think you deserve. The second failure, the classic commentaries say, is that they did the exact reverse of what Moshe Rabbeinu told them from God. Alu zeba negev. Look at the negative and then eventually find the positive. Because what you lead yourself towards, that is the real objective. So is the positive going to be lost in the negative, or is the negative going to be lost in the positive? So if you look at the way they reported, they first reported the negative and then the positive, so they would be able to create an environment, an arena in which the good would be lost. So and in fact they sandwiched it. And eventually they said, yes, Tova Aretz, it's very good, the produce is very good, yes, there's big produce. Oh, but is this a country that is terrible? We'll never be able to take it. This is impossible to get. So the fact that they wanted the negative message to be the predominant message, and as Rashi says in his commentary, that if you want to get across a negative message, or in fact a big lie, one should always mix in a little bit of truth. The demagogues of the world, the people who are promoting disinformation and propaganda, will always mix in a bit of truth to give credibility to the big lie. So they came back and they said, yes, there is massive fruit. This is the fruit, magnificent fruit. It's very, very, very beautiful fruit. But it's impossible to take the land. So all the good is lost in the negative. And that is how they presented the issue. The third mistake of the spies is that a spy has to give back information to the commander-in-chief, who makes the decision as to what to subsequently do based on the information. The Mossad had information now in this war where exactly the metro, as they called it, the underground that was built by millions and millions and millions of dollars, most of those dollars being sent as tzedakah, as charity, to be able to help uplift the people of Gaza. Instead of building hospitals and schools, instead of feeding and creating an economy, they put it into bunkers, but not bunkers to protect the people as they complain. You guys have it easy. You can go into the bunkers. We don't have bunkers. Yeah, well, they did build a massive metro underground, but it was only for the troops and it was only to cause damage and to launch rockets, not to save the civilian population. So Israel had that information. They had that information for a long time, but they obviously decided when to use it. They used it very cleverly. Just as the war was beginning, this last war, Israel got the message out that their land invasion is about to take place. They got the media even involved. Everyone was announcing the land invasion was taking place. All the generals and all the leaders, military leaders, went underground into their metro, and that's when Israel bombed it. They bombed the entire metro. Tens of kilometers of this, which was built at millions and billions of dollars. It's a huge setback to the enemy. But who decides what to do with the information? The information comes. It doesn't mean that immediately you decide what to do. And who decides? Not the spy. The spy who's done the surveillance and reports back to the commander-in-chief. The spy is not the one to decide what to do. Who decides? The commander-in-chief. It was for Moshe Rabbeinu to decide. So the third sin of the spies was that they came to a conclusion. Not only did they report what they saw, but they then said, we cannot take the land. The land is impregnable. It is too strong. We have to have a different dream. We're not going to be able to take this land. They had no right. That was not their empowered. We cannot say that in the name of truth, and all they were trying to do was to tell the truth, they were calling the shots and saying that the dream, this whole magnificent vision of a promised land is over. And they disheartened the entire Jewish people. If they were telling the truth, they should have gone back to Moses, spoken about the good and the bad, and presented the good as the positive direction that it was taking. And certainly they should not have come to a conclusion which disheartened the entire Jewish people that we cannot take the land. The fourth failure of the spies is the generalization. They said that Gam b'nei anakim ra'inu sham, we saw giants all over the land. In actual fact, there was one region that they saw giants, but they began to interpret and to generalize from a specific to the entire land, so that they would create the impression that there was a problem all over. This generalization is a method of distraction that unfortunately a lot of people use a lot of the time. If you want to know what sometimes is the root cause of marriages falling apart, of friendships falling apart, of people nuking their own communities, it's a generalization. And the more one generalizes, the less possibility there is to fix the problem. And the more that one is specific and particular in identifying a weakness or difficulty, the more there is a possibility of solving the problem. So if you tell a husband and wife who are using the terminology, he always speaks in this and this way. She never ever has food or the cleans, makes sure the house is clean. When you have words like that, you know that it's on the rocks, because how do you solve a never? What you can solve is that Tuesday morning, this is what happened. How do we resolve it? How can we talk about fixing today? Then you have a solution, because you're looking at the specifics and you're opening up the details so that you can find solutions. But generalization does not want anyone to have specifics. It does not want to find details. It speaks about all the time and everywhere, and that's why the problem is so widespread that it is impossible. It's not worth. It's not worth even dealing with because the marriage is over, because it's always a problem. He never brings in the garbage. On Tuesdays when they come and collect the garbage, he never brings the bin in. Let's just talk about what to do next time when it's garbage day. How do you get your husband to be a better, more responsible husband? Talk about the day, and then you can find solutions. So what happens is the spies represent the negativity. There's generalizer. If you generalize, you create panic, you create an environment that festers and that is beyond solution. I keep referring to what Israel went through because, look at this. This is a negative report about Israel. And there's so much negativity. I mean, it's unprecedented. I don't ever remember so much negativity being written by different sectors of the community, religious sectors. Yesterday was the Anglican Church. It's in the newspapers. It's coming from religious centers. It's coming from human rights, obviously United Nations. Wherever one turns, there is negativity being said about Israel. So let's just see how the generalization worked over here. The whole thing started, this whole last war started because Israel allegedly was taking away the homes in East Jerusalem, and we were, it was land capture. We were taking away the homes of people that were living in East Jerusalem. Now, in actual fact, for anyone who's followed the information, what was unfolding was in the high courts. It was not a political move. It was a legal move because there was ownership of property that dated back decades, and there had been the people that were in those buildings were paying rent for many, many years, and then they decided to stop paying rent, and the people who owned the houses went to court. And it took years and years until eventually it came to the fore, and eventually it was ruled by the courts that these 4 particular houses would have, the people would have to pay rent. They weren't evicted, wasn't forced eviction. They were told that they have to pay rent because they do not own the houses, somebody else owns the houses. And even if you have a claim to the country, you take it to the courts and you appeal and you deal with it. But look how, from talking about a few houses that had a legal status that was presented into the High Court, it related to those few houses for a legal issue. It's a civil issue in the municipality in the city of Yerushalayim, was turned into the mass evictions, the generalization. The Israelis are evicting all of the people from East Jerusalem. And that's how it gains some momentum. Before we knew it, there was rioting on the Temple Mount, a response to that. And then, notwithstanding the fact that the whole world says you cannot have a disproportional response. If you send one rocket, you can only send one rocket back. If they kill one person, you can only kill one person, because that's a proportional response. But the fact that there was lack of proportionality for 4 houses, resulting in thousands of rockets being shot on Israel, nobody says that it was disproportionate to resort to sending rockets for a land issue that was being discussed in the courts. Nobody spoke about it, but at any rate, it was the generalization. When you generalize, you remove the possibility of solutions. And it happens in communities. When people talk about the rabbi always, or the chairman always, or the committee didn't, or none of the people ever say hello, walk into shul, and they never, the generalization is what makes it impossible to solve. And a person's really honest, it generally is a particular day and a particular time and a mistake, and maybe even a wrongdoing. But then identify it, frame it, put it into perspective, and then give the opportunity to fix it, because that's what everyone would really want to ultimately do. So that was the 4th problem, the generalization. So I've somehow connected this negative report about Israel to all the terrible negative reporting that's taken place in the world. Firstly, it's not about bringing a message to the right place or to the right person to find a solution. It's to report to all the people. It's to hold press conferences. It's to talk on Twitter. That does not ring with credibility. The negativity that overwhelms the positivity. There's not one good thing to say about Israel. There's not one good thing that they've ever done. Even when they are bringing vaccinations to the people, and they vaccinate Arabs and Israelis and Jews and everybody, there's negativity. That there was, as one of the comedians said, Israel at one stage said that they've vaccinated half the population. He says, well, I know which half of the population are vaccinated. It's obviously the Jews. The big lie that Israel wanted to segregate Arabs not to get the vaccine. It was those under the Palestinian Authority who initially said, we are the ones who are not part of Israel for this. This is not Israel's responsibility by virtue of the Accords. In fact, we are independent and we are going to sort out our own vaccination program. That is what they said initially. Since then, the tune has changed. But you can always find the negative. You can find the negative in the most positive elements. You can find the negative. We make conclusions. We draw our own conclusions rather than reporting the facts. And everybody believes that they can make the final decision, the conclusion. And as we've just discussed, the generalization means that you take things away from detail that can be resolved and you create a general morose of bad. And the final point that the commentaries speak about is a very telling verse where they turned, the 10 spies, with a negative report, turned to the Jewish people and they say, we were in our own eyes like grasshoppers next to these giants. And so we were in their eyes. This is the grasshopper mentality. It's when you perceive yourself as tiny compared to the giants of the land. When you don't believe in yourself and you see yourself as a grasshopper, we ultimately are seen by others how we see ourselves. And if we don't have the guts to see our strength, then nobody will. The grasshopper mentality is when we simply don't believe in ourselves. We author the destiny by how we look at ourselves. And isn't that the case that we project the image around us? When we walk around believing that we are a failure, that is how people look at us as a failure. When we project success, commitment, achievement, goals that are going to be accomplished, then people see us for what we've accomplished. So we should not look at it as ourselves as a grasshopper. And the grasshopper could be in physical strength. The grasshopper mentality could also be the Jew who thinks that we don't have a legitimate claim to Israel. One of the articles that appeared, one of the letters that was written and appeared in the press was entitled "Not in My Name" and signed by many Jews. There were many signatures there that are not Jews, but there was many names from the Jewish community. Not in my name, because Israel is despicable and terrible and behaving badly and is the cause of so much of the problem in the Middle East. When our own family, when our own community or members of them look at ourselves and see ourselves as being such a terrible people, as being so guilty, as being the cause of everything, and not one mention in the entire "Not in My Name" talks about the fact that there is an adversary. There's somebody who's firing rockets. There's somebody who has a constitution that says, I want to destroy Israel off the map. They're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means from the river Jordan till the sea, which is the Mediterranean, will be Jew-free. That's what they're chanting. The world doesn't actually begin to know what they're chanting, but they're saying, no Israel. So, Not in My Name presents a document that says Israel is the sole aggressor, complicator, cause of all the problems. And no mention whatsoever of the fact that there's a difficulty in the region and a problem that is being caused by an enemy that is sworn to destroy us. The grasshopper mentality could be that we feel that we're too weak, And the grasshopper mentality can be that we believe that we don't have legitimacy. Maybe we don't have a right to the land. Maybe we are people who are just trying to usurp the rights of others. Maybe there wasn't a temple there in the first place. Maybe Moses didn't exist. So when we look at ourselves as grasshoppers, when our own community talks that way, how could the rest of the world not talk that way as well? I want to share the underlying sin of the spies, according to the teachings of Hasidus. And I've overspoken my claim, so I'm going to have to present it as fast as I can. The spies, initially we were told that they were great leaders. They were leaders of the tribes. These were important people. How could they make such a mistake? They actually come back and they say that the land is impossible to conquer, ki chazaku mimenu, and as the commentaries say, not only did they say it's too complicated for us to take the land, they were actually implying that even God can't take the land. This is much too strong even for God. And the question that we obviously have is that these are the spies that lived through the Exodus. They saw the sea split. They saw the miracles and the plagues. And they saw the greatest force in the entire world at the time, Egypt, rendered useless by the hand of God. How could they not have confidence in God? How could they not believe that this could be done? And when Joshua, interestingly, and Caleb respond, I would think that was how they should respond. They should have come back at the spies to say, what are you talking about? We're not going to do it. Miracles. Don't you remember the miracles? We saw the sea split. God will cause whatever miracles to have to happen, and we will win the war. We'll be able to take the land. Why do you say not? Of course we will. Joshua and Caleb don't do that. All they say is, Allah na'aleh, we will go up, Tovah ha'aretz, the land is very, very good. That's how they answer. They don't address the issues. Hasidus explains that the spies had an issue with the concept of leaving the desert and to enter the promised land. Because in the desert there were miracles. The whole lifestyle was a miracle. The food was manna from heaven every day. The water was miraculous. Everything was miraculous. The whole lifestyle was miraculous. They were in the embryonic stage where the unborn child, has everything, the warmth, the food, the insulation, the comfort. The child is in the perfect situation. That is how the Jewish people were from the Exodus until this point. In a God bubble that protected them, fed them, looked after them, everything was perfect. And now they had to leave that behind. And that's why the spies said, Eretz ochelet yoshveo, this land devours its inhabitants. What's going to happen to us? We are a people that can handle the miracles, and the miracles protect us. That's the world we know where God operates with the system. But God's asking us to leave the system. He's asking us to leave the desert, to go into the land. There we're going to have to plant. There we're going to have to go into agriculture. We're going to have to work the land. We're going to have to do everything ourselves. There we're going to be consumed. Eretz ochelet yoshveh means the land will devour us. We're going to be involved with the physical world, and the physical world is going to envelop us and sweep us away. We don't want to go to the promised land. We want to stay in the desert. We want to stay with the miracles. And that's why Joshua and Caleb couldn't answer and say, don't you remember all the miracles? Of course they knew the miracles. They were saying, but we're going to leave the realm of the miracle. We're going to go into the mundane world. We're going to get caught up in business and all the headaches of a physical world. We're going to not survive this. And Caleb and Joshua therefore answered, Tovah ha'aretz ma'od ma'od. It is a very, very good land. If you think that serving God is in the desert, when there are miracles around you, the challenges of life, of being involved in a physical world, give the opportunity for exponential growth, much greater development. We can become much more than we could ever become in the desert. As one says to the child who says, I don't want to be born, I'm comfortable here in the womb. And the answer is, go into this world. Yes, you'll cry. And yes, there will be challenges. And you're going to have to work out how to walk and talk and do all these things. But you're going to grow. You'll never be able to do it in the embryonic stage, in the womb. You have to check out. You have to leave the desert and go into the promised land. That is ultimately where the world affords us the opportunity of real growth. And that's why the last, I'll say it as quickly as I can, the last mitzvahs of the Torah talk about linking the above with the below, or the below and the above. For example, you're standing on top of the altar, there has to be a libation of the wine where the wine would reach down to the very foundations of the altar. And it was symbolic. It's saying if you're standing on top of the altar at the highest point, that's not only the arena in which you operate. Pour the libation of wine which reaches down to the very bottom, to the foundation. Because life is not about standing on top of the altar. It's about reaching to the world that is below. And the reverse mitzvah is challah. When you take dough from the wheat that you've cultivated and taken from the ground, bring it to the Kohen. Realize that what comes from the earth can reach the spiritual. What comes from the spiritual can reach the physical. Don't cut the two worlds apart and say that in the desert, we want to be in a spiritual world enveloped by God. Particularly going into the physical world gives you the ability to bring the spiritual into the physical and to elevate the physical into spiritual purpose. That's why those are the mitzvahs. The libation is pouring from the top down. Challah is bringing from the bottom up. And finally, tzitzit, which again envelops us, covers us, surrounds us, and then the strands of the tzitzit, which represent the mitzvahs, the fulfillment of the details of Jewish life. So we've had a storyline of the Jewish people unfortunately failing as a result of wanting to send spies, a whole process of negative reporting which creates the undoing of the Jewish people, the decision that all of the Jews would die in the next 40 years and would not enter the promised land, only their children would, save for Caleb and Yeshua. And we learn the response to the spies. Don't think that it is about staying in the desert in a miraculous state. It's particularly by going into the natural environment and being involved in a physical world and working in the physical elements that one can ultimately reach the highest heights. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining. And I wish everyone a good Shabbos and a good week. Let's take this down.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rose. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Good night, Rabbi.
Bye.
Have a very
Have a
beautiful
good
All
week.
be well.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Have a good
Bye-bye, everyone.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.